Turner set out alone into the heart of Grand Teton's wildest canyons and disappeared without a trace. Every weekend, her father returned to those mountains, refusing to give in to silence. Search teams combed the backcountry, but all they ever found were quiet trails fading into the forest. Then, nearly a year later, a park ranger tracking golden eagles spotted something on a narrow ledge, something that would upend the entire investigation and reveal a story no one was prepared to hear. The Grand Tetons don't ease into view. They explode from the ground in jagged defiance, massive towers of granite, unforgiving and ancient. For generations, people have been drawn here to test their limits, find peace, or simply witness nature's raw power. In the summer of 2023, 24-year-old Amelia Turner, Amy to everyone who knew her, came for all three. She wasn't a thrill seeker. She wasn't reckless. Amy was an artist, a quiet observer of the wilderness. She had left behind a promising design career to live in Jackson, Wyoming, working part-time at a local gear shop and living in a small apartment that overlooked the very peaks that had inspired her since she was a child. Inside her home, the walls were lined with topographic maps, routes carefully marked in pencil, some already explored, others planned. Her own nature photographs hung beside them, a moose in the morning mist, a glowing Teton peak at sunrise, delicate alpine flowers on a windswept ridge. Her friends described her as deeply thoughtful, almost reverent when it came to nature. She respected the mountains completely, never underestimated them. Amy found clarity in solitude. She often hiked alone, drawn to the stillness of remote trails where the only sounds were her breath, the wind, and the quiet click of her Nikon camera. That camera, her most cherished belonging, was how she captured the deep emotions nature stirred in her. Her latest plan was her boldest yet, a 4-day solo journey along the Paintbrush Canyon and Cascade Canyon Loop. It was a classic route, but no easy feat. Steep climbs, exposed ridges, and some of the most stunning views in the region. For Amy, it wasn't just a hike, it was a personal mission. She hoped this trip would produce a set of photographs powerful enough for her first gallery exhibition. Her roommate Chloe remembered how Amy spent nights poring over maps, her headlamp lighting up the living room as she traced the loop with focus and joy. She was chasing the perfect sunrise, Chloe said, something only the Tetons could give her. Amy prepared for the trip with the kind of precision that defined her. Her mother, Sarah, recalled their final video call. Amy proudly showed off her gear, her worn-in blue Osprey backpack, her tent, her compact cook stove, even her neatly portioned meals sealed in labeled bags. She held up her satellite communicator and promised to check in every evening. She was so prepared, her mother later told investigators, her voice trembling. She didn't miss a thing. Extra batteries, first aid, water filter. She was always careful, and that's what made what happened next so impossible to understand. On the morning of August 12, 2023, Amy parked her silver Subaru at the String Lake trailhead. The air was cool and crisp, the sky a flawless blue. Before heading out, she noticed an older couple admiring the lake and asked if they could take her photo. The man, a tourist from Ohio, snapped what would become the last known image of her, Amy standing in a bright pink tank top, hair pulled back, hiking pole in one hand, the Tetons rising behind her like a painting. She thanked them with a smile that felt full of life. They would later recall how happy she seemed, confident, ready, and then she was gone. She told us she was heading up into Paintbrush Canyon, recalled Eleanor, the woman Amy had spoken to that morning. She said she felt like the luckiest person alive to have this right outside her door. After saying goodbye, Amy paused by the shoreline, took in one last breath of mountain air, and sent a photo to her mom. It came with a message that would turn out to be the final words anyone ever received from her. "Off I go, the mountains are calling. Weather's perfect. Talk to you Sunday night." With that, she tightened the straps on her pack, smiled, and walked toward the trailhead, stepping into the stillness beneath the tall lodgepole pines, a single silhouette vanishing into the wilderness. Sunday arrived, and as the sun dipped behind the jagged horizon, casting gold and violet across the sky, Sarah Turner sat in her Salt Lake City home, waiting for the familiar vibration of her phone. But 9 p.m. came and went. No message, no call. At first, she pushed away the uneasy feeling. Amy was experienced. Maybe her satellite device ran out of charge. Maybe she made camp with other hikers and decided to stay one more night. Logical explanations came easily at first, but by Monday evening, those explanations unraveled. The silence from the mountains no longer felt peaceful. It felt ominous. Every call went to voicemail. Amy's cheerful recorded greeting was now unbearable to hear. Every text sat unread, a single gray checkmark floating in limbo. Sarah knew her daughter too well. Amy was thoughtful, always responsible. She wouldn't just disappear. At 7:15 p.m. on Monday, her hands trembling, Sarah dialed the Teton County Sheriff's Office. She explained everything, calm at first, then crumbling as she gave Amy's name and described her route. Within the hour, the National Park Service was alerted. A ranger was sent to the String Lake trailhead to check for her vehicle. That night, under the moonlit peaks of the Grand Tetons, Amelia Turner was officially listed as a missing person. Her name shifted from a vibrant, creative young woman to a file, a map, and a question echoing through the wilderness. The search began not with panic, but with protocol. At dawn on Tuesday, Ranger Tom Albright, his face etched by decades of sun and snow, stood beside Amy's silver Subaru. The once busy parking lot was now quiet, draped in the early stillness of morning. A thin coat of dust covered the windshield, hinting at how long it had been there. Inside the car, a travel mug sat in the console. A folded trail map rested on the passenger seat. Everything looked normal, and that's what made it all feel so wrong. He opened the trail register. Amelia Turner, Paintbrush Cascade Loop, 3 nights. Expected return, Sunday. But there was no sign-out entry. In over 20 years on the job, Albright had seen this before. Usually, it ended with the missing hiker returning, sunburnt and smiling, after losing track of time or exploring a side trail. But this felt different. His gut told him something was off. By 8 a.m., that gut feeling had become a full-scale search and rescue mission. Teams from multiple agencies gathered at a temporary command center near Jenny Lake. Radios crackled. Search dogs barked. The air buzzed with purpose. Lead Ranger Mike Connolly stood before a huge map with red lines marking the entire 20-mile loop, one of the most rugged areas in the Tetons. "Here's what we know," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. Amelia Turner, 24th, experienced solo hiker, fully equipped, first night target, Holly Lake. That's where we focus. Teams split. Some began hiking in from both directions. Helicopters scanned the terrain from above. K-9 teams were flown to high-altitude ridges to sweep downward. Then, just after noon, came the first break. A ground team climbing the steep switchbacks of Paintbrush Canyon spotted something out of place. A small green dome tent tucked quietly in the trees, its color barely noticeable against the wild palette of the forest. It was a tent that didn't belong there anymore, and it marked the beginning of a deeper mystery. The campsite was right where she said it would be, tucked in a quiet grove near Holly Lake, protected by tall fir trees. It was Amy's camp, but something about it felt off. Her tent was perfectly pitched, stakes firm, sleeping pad unrolled, and beside it, her light day pack sat neatly, almost too neatly. Inside were just a few items: an empty water bottle, a protein bar wrapper, a tube of sunscreen. But one thing was missing. Her main backpack, the heavy Osprey pack that carried her food, sleeping bag, and survival gear, was gone. So were her hiking boots. This didn't line up. If she had gone for a short hike, she would have taken the day pack, not left it behind. But what the scene suggested was something strange. She had set up camp, then laced up her boots, grabbed her full pack, far heavier and meant for long treks, and walked off into the wild, leaving her smaller essentials behind. It made no sense. Veteran searchers felt it immediately. Something was wrong. K9 teams were brought in without delay. One of the most experienced dogs, a German shepherd named Kaiser, was led to the tent. He sniffed, whined, and suddenly pulled his handler forward with purpose. But the trail he followed didn't lead to any known path. It climbed instead, up a steep, unstable slope choked with thick willows and fallen timber. The terrain got worse with every step. After a brutal half-mile ascent, they reached a wall of tangled rocks and dead wood. And there, Kaiser stopped. He sniffed frantically, circled, looked to his handler, then sat. The trail was gone. Not faded, not confused. Gone, as if Amy had vanished into thin air. The handler radioed back. "Scent ends here. There's nowhere else to go." While the dogs hit a dead end, other rangers tracked down the couple from Ohio who had taken Amy's last photo. They were found at their hotel, preparing to fly home. Devastated by the news, they shared what little they remembered. She was glowing, Eleanor said. Full of joy, said she felt lucky to be there. Then, her brow furrowed. "Wait, about 10 minutes after we left her, we passed a man on the trail, hiking alone." Gerald added, "He had this intense look, military-style gear, worn and old, didn't make eye contact, didn't speak, just kept walking with this hard, weathered face. It wasn't much, but in a case with no leads, it became the focus." A forensic artist sketched a composite. A man in his late 30s or early 40s, gaunt, deep-set eyes, grim expression. Was he just another hiker, or something else entirely? No one came forward to identify him. No other sightings surfaced. He became a shadow in the investigation, a silent question in every ranger's mind. Meanwhile, the helicopters kept flying, slowly, methodically scanning the valleys and peaks. But from the air, the Tetons were a living maze, a wall of green below, deep, shadow-filled canyons, jagged cliffs. From above, it was clear, if someone were hidden here, it could be forever. Then, the weather turned. On day 5, the blue skies vanished. Storm clouds rolled in, deep purple and gray. The wind howled, thunder echoed, and then came the rain. Cold, relentless, sheets of it. Lightning shattered the sky. Search teams were pulled back. For nearly 2 full days, the field went silent. No boots on the ground, no dogs, no eyes. Everyone knew what that meant. Any remaining footprints, gone. Any scent trail, washed away. Even the most rugged searchers admitted the storm had changed everything. It felt as though the mountains themselves had chosen to erase her. 10 days passed. All they had to show was an untouched campsite and a trail that led to nowhere. Resources were stretched thin, volunteers exhausted. At the evening briefing on the 10th day, Ranger Mike Connolly, his voice heavy, gave the order no one wanted to hear. The full-scale search was ending. From that moment on, Amy's case would be listed under limited continuous patrol, a quiet phrase that carried a quiet truth. They no longer expected to find her alive. The command post was packed up, helicopters grounded. The people who had searched every ridge and ravine went home, and the mountains stood silent once more. A heavy silence settled over the operation, one that felt final. Amy's parents had been holding a quiet vigil in Jackson, clinging to hope. Now that hope was collapsing. Her father, Mark Turner, a man more comfortable with maps than emotions, stood alone in the now vacant Ranger briefing room. He stared at the red line tracing his daughter's planned route, surrounded by a sea of untamed wilderness. The official search might have ended, but for Mark, it had only just begun. As the seasons changed in the Tetons, nature showed no mercy. Summer's green faded into the fiery golds and reds of fall. Then came the first snow, blanketing the range in silence. The peaks disappeared behind a wall of gray, and the world Amy loved grew quiet again, this time with an eerie finality. Amy's name slowly began to shift from person to memory. The missing posters at the visitor center curled at the edges. The sun faded her photo. Her case file, now thick with reports and theories, felt colder with every passing day. The investigation was marked inactive. Her name added to a somber list of those claimed by the mountains, people who had entered the wild and never returned. In Jackson and among the park staff, Amy became a quiet legend, a story told to tourists and new workers, the gifted photographer who walked into Paintbrush Canyon and never came back. But for one person, her story was far from over. Mark Turner refused to let silence be the last word. A retired land surveyor, Mark had built a career turning chaos into clarity, mapping rivers, mountains, and ridgelines into clean, understandable grids. Now he faced a mystery that defied order. How could someone like Amy, so experienced, so grounded, simply vanish? While official search teams had focused on wide sweeps and probable zones, Mark's mission became personal, precise, and unrelenting. He sold a parcel of land to fund his private search, traded comfort for resolve. Each weekend, he loaded his old Ford pickup with climbing gear, GPS tools, food, and hope, and drove the long road from Salt Lake City to Jackson. Rangers began to recognize his truck, parked at remote trailheads before dawn and long after sunset. They'd offer him coffee, weather warnings, and quiet respect. They knew he wasn't chasing ghosts, he was chasing closure. Mark wasn't wandering. He used his skills the only way he knew how, with discipline. He created his own maps, high-resolution overlays combining topography, satellite imagery, and terrain data. He broke the mountains into small, specific grids. While helicopters flew above, Mark was on foot, scanning thickets, checking for even the smallest detail, a shift in the soil, a flash of color, a broken branch. He found nothing, but every blank square he crossed off only made him more determined. This wasn't about hope anymore. It was about bringing her home. While Mark searched the mountains, others searched the internet. Amy's case took root in online forums, true crime pages and hiking message boards alike. Armchair investigators, or web sleuths, dissected every public detail. The most accepted theory was the simplest: a tragic fall. She'd slipped, possibly from an exposed ledge, and her body had come to rest in a hidden crevice or overgrown ravine, a place just out of view. Others floated the idea of a wildlife encounter, maybe a bear or mountain lion, but with no blood, no torn gear, and no signs of a struggle at camp, even that theory started to fall apart. Then came a more complex suggestion that Amy had left by choice. A few lines from her personal journal, shared publicly by her grieving family, were twisted into evidence. She had written about needing space, craving stillness. Some speculated she'd staged her disappearance to escape the world. But the most gripping theory, the one that captured imaginations, centered on the stranger. The hiker with the gaunt face, the military-style backpack, the man who didn't speak. Online, he was given names: the Teton Phantom, Cascade Creek John, the ghost of Paintbrush Divide. With no identity, no trail, and no answers, he became a canvas for every dark possibility. Was he a predator? Did he follow Amy? Was he watching from the trees as she smiled for that final photo? No one could say, and the silence only deepened the mystery. Mark Turner kept going. Each empty trailhead, each dead-end ravine, each quiet day in the woods without a discovery. Still, he searched. Because to him, Amy wasn't a story. She was his daughter. For a year, online forums kept circling the same theories. Some clung to hope. Others dissected every detail with obsessive precision. But then, in late August 2024, a new clue surfaced. Literally. A fly fisherman wading through a remote stretch of Cascade Creek, several miles downstream from the original search area, spotted something wedged between two rocks, glinting beneath the water. He reached in and pulled it free. It was a black hiking pole, worn grip, scratched tip, a high-end model often favored by serious hikers. He remembered the posters, the missing young woman, the camera, the mountains, he reported the find to the Park Service. For a moment, everything changed. Investigators quickly matched the model to the one Amy Turner had been holding in her last known photograph. Her parents were notified, their hope rising with painful intensity. A search team was dispatched to the site, but that hope was short-lived. Experts explained that in a powerful watershed like the Tetons, a spring melt or flash flood could carry objects for miles. The pole may have traveled far from where it was originally dropped, possibly dislodged from high ground and pushed along the creek bed by runoff. It was real. It was Amy's. But it led nowhere. Just like the scent trail that ended in silence, this clue had no path forward. A fragment of her story, painfully specific and frustratingly useless. The mountains had revealed one small secret, only to pull the silence even tighter around the rest. As summer returned to the high country, life moved on. Wildflowers bloomed in bursts of color. Marmots stretched lazily on sun-warmed rocks. Raptors soared overhead, scanning the terrain with ancient patience. And it was one of these birds that would unknowingly guide the next breakthrough. Ranger David Chen was a 15-year veteran of the National Park Service, a soft-spoken expert on the Tetons, and a highly respected wildlife researcher. His official title didn't reflect his true calling. He was a devoted ornithologist, specializing in golden eagles. In late July, nearly a year after Amy's disappearance, David was conducting his annual nesting survey. It took him deep into areas few humans ever visit: high basins, sheer ridgelines, and hidden valleys carved by time and ice. On a clear morning, standing alone on a wind-blown ridge, David raised his binoculars and scanned a familiar cliffside where golden eagles had nested for generations. He spotted the nest, a massive sprawl of sticks and bone perched on a narrow ledge halfway up a rock wall. But something was off. Amid the natural browns and grays, his lens caught a flash of unnatural color, bright red and turquoise. Trash, he assumed. Sadly, even the most remote corners of the park weren't immune to the careless remnants of human activity. Concerned that debris might harm the birds or their young, David made a decision. He'd climb up and clear the nest himself. He radioed his position to dispatch and began the difficult ascent. It wasn't an easy climb. The slope was steep, the ground loose. Each step sent gravel tumbling below, but David moved with practiced care. As he approached the nest, the colors became more distinct. The turquoise wasn't rope, the red wasn't plastic. His unease deepened. At last, he reached the ledge. The eagle nest stretched nearly 5 feet across, twisted branches, bones, feathers, and now something else entirely. Woven directly into the nest's structure was a torn piece of turquoise nylon, like that from a gear sack or a backpack cover. Nearby, tangled in the sticks, were what looked like a weathered pair of women's underwear, mostly white, but with faded red trim around the waistband and legs. In that moment, David froze. His mind flashed, not to trash, but to a face. Amy Turner, the trailhead photo, the blue pack with red straps. The colors matched. And deep in his gut, he knew. This wasn't litter. This wasn't chance. This was a clue. One that had been sitting high above the world in the grasp of a golden eagle's nest, waiting for someone to find it. David Chen backed away from the nest slowly, his heart pounding. He pulled out his service phone, hands shaking, and began taking photos, documenting every detail, every angle. He didn't touch anything. He knew this was no longer just debris. It was potential evidence in a case that had haunted the park for nearly a year. His voice was tight, almost unrecognizable as he radioed in. "Dispatch, this is Chen. I'm at the Upper Basin nesting site. I think I've found something related to the Turner case." The message hit the ranger station like a bolt of lightning. A cold, silent file, shelved and gathering dust, was suddenly alive again. When David returned, the items he recovered were carefully bagged, tagged, and laid out on a sterile surface beside a printout of Amy's last known photograph. There, under the fluorescent lights, the comparison was undeniable. The red trim on the weathered fabric was a perfect match to the straps of her blue hiking backpack. A grim silence settled over the room, and a chilling new theory began to take shape. Golden eagles are not just hunters, they're scavengers, drawn to the scent of decay. Investigators whispered what many feared: an eagle could have been attracted by the scent of death, perhaps from Amy's remains or clothing left nearby. It may have taken a scrap of fabric to its nest, unknowingly delivering a clue from a place no human had reached. That discovery changed everything. Amy hadn't simply disappeared into the wilderness. She hadn't just fallen into a hidden crevice. The clue suggested something far more specific and far more tragic. Her body, or what remained of it, was likely still there, on that same remote, nearly unreachable slope. This was no longer a search across hundreds of square miles. The focus had narrowed. A 1-mile grid, a brutal stretch of cliffs and scree, a place too wild for most to explore. But now it was the center of a mission, not to save, but to recover. The new operation began with surgical precision. Gone was the hopeful chaos of the initial search. In its place, a quiet, focused team of specialists brought in when the outcome is almost certain. Forensic anthropologists from the University of Wyoming, elite recovery teams from Teton County, cadaver dog units trained to detect even the faintest traces of human remains. They were flown in by helicopter, the rotors stirring the alpine meadow into a frantic blur of grass and wind. The air was thin, the mood heavier still. This wasn't just rugged terrain, it was sacred ground, and now it bore witness to something deeply human. The terrain below the nest was treacherous: steep grassy slopes, jagged outcroppings, and unstable scree that shifted like ball bearings under every step. The team advanced slowly, methodically, in a tight formation. Dogs swept back and forth, handlers silent, eyes scanning every movement. For 2 full days, the mountain gave them nothing but silence. But on the 3rd morning, when even the most hopeful began to doubt, a black Labrador named Odin stopped near a tangle of wind-bent firs and thorny brush. He whined, pawed the earth. His handler froze. This was the signal. The team moved in. Dr. Alana Rios, the lead forensic anthropologist, knelt beside the dog. What looked like undisturbed forest floor revealed something else to her trained eye: an unnatural pattern to the soil, a subtle pile of stones that didn't belong. "Start here," she said quietly. They began with small trowels and brushes. No shovels, no rushing. Just after an hour, one of the team members stopped. His tool had struck something beneath the soil, soft but solid. He brushed the dirt away. A sleeve, faded blue, the kind of technical fabric used for hiking shirts. Then just inches away, the curve of a bone. The team went quiet. What followed was slow, respectful, deliberate. Over the next several hours, they unearthed a shallow grave, less than 2 feet deep. Inside were skeletal remains. Every piece was documented, photographed, and prepared for transport. Later that evening, the remains were flown to the county medical examiner's office. The identification was swift. Dental records confirmed what many had already begun to accept in their hearts. The remains belonged to Amelia Turner. When the news reached her parents, it struck with quiet devastation. But beneath the sorrow was something else, something painfully fragile: closure. After a year of silence, Amy had been found, not by chance, not by algorithms or maps, but by instinct, an eagle's nesting choice, a ranger's eye, and the quiet determination of those who never stopped looking. The truth uncovered during the autopsy was far darker than anyone had feared. Dr. Rios's analysis revealed multiple fractures throughout the skeletal remains, including a significant injury to the skull, one that could not have been caused by a fall. The nature of the trauma pointed clearly to a violent attack. And then came the confirmation no one was prepared for. Forensic testing of trace evidence found with the remains confirmed what investigators had only begun to suspect. Amy Turner had been the victim of a brutal crime. She had not simply vanished during a hike. She had been assaulted and murdered. Her case was no longer classified as a disappearance or accident. It was now a homicide investigation. The news reshaped everything. Investigators re-examined every detail from the original case with new eyes, this time not looking for missteps or wrong turns, but for signs of intent. The one and only potential lead they had, the vague description of a hiker spotted near Amy on the morning she disappeared, suddenly became their top priority. The sketch that had once seemed like a long shot was now the key. It was re-released to the public, not as an appeal for a witness, but as a warning about a possible suspect in a violent crime. The community of Jackson was shaken. The online world, which had followed Amy's case from the start, erupted. What had once been a haunting mystery was now a terrifying reality. Then, from a small town an hour south of Jackson, came the call that would break the case wide open. A woman named Brenda, working the front desk at a modest motel in Pinedale, saw the sketch on a local news report, and something clicked. The face, the hollow eyes, the hard jaw. She had seen him before. She called the sheriff's tip line immediately. She remembered the man clearly. He had stayed at the motel the previous summer, paying week to week in cash. Said he was in town for seasonal construction work. He kept to himself. And then, just a few days after the news of Amy's disappearance hit the headlines, he vanished without a word. His name, as she recalled it from the motel ledger, was Robert Frazier. With a name, the investigation moved at lightning speed. A joint task force was formed. They uncovered that Robert Bob Frazier was 42, a drifter with almost no digital footprint. He had a sealed juvenile record involving a violent offense. For years, he had moved from job to job, construction, ranch work, never staying in one place for long. Following leads from labor agencies and employment records, they tracked him to a ranch near Billings, Montana. Just before sunrise, a tactical team surrounded the remote property. Frazier was arrested without incident. His demeanor was unsettling, calm, detached, almost blank. In a shed filled with dust and discarded tools, agents found a military-style footlocker sealed with a heavy lock. When they pried it open, what they found was chilling. Inside were personal belongings, driver's licenses from multiple women, pieces of jewelry, locks of hair, and, at the very bottom, wrapped in a worn t-shirt, was a camera. It was a Nikon D750. The serial number matched the one Amy had carried on her final hike. The camera was rushed to the FBI's forensic lab. Technicians recovered the memory card. The first images were Amy's, stunning shots of the Tetons, wildflowers, and the breathtaking views she had come to capture. But then the photos changed. The final sequence had been taken by someone else. Images that documented a crime no words could fully describe. They showed Amy in her final moments. They captured the attack and the aftermath. It was undeniable. It was devastating. It was the truth, preserved by the very device she had once used to tell her own story. In the interrogation room, Robert Frazier said nothing. For hours he sat in silence, cold, empty, a wall. No reaction, no emotion. Then, without warning, the FBI agent placed a manila folder on the table. Calmly, deliberately. Inside were the photographs, the timeline, the proof. There was no need for a confession. The camera had already spoken. He didn't say a word. The FBI agent simply opened a folder and began laying out a sequence of glossy photographs, one by one, across the cold metal table. The first few were Amy's own, awe-inspiring landscapes taken during the final hours of her life. Then the images changed. A photo taken from a distance, Amy hiking unaware she was being watched. Then another, closer, then closer still. Each photo told part of the story. No words were spoken. The investigators let the images speak for themselves. And finally, the last sequence. Silent, chilling, undeniable. Frazier stared at the photos as they were laid out before him. His silence deepened. According to the interrogation transcript, he didn't move or speak for 7 full minutes. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the ventilation. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet, flat, as if narrating a routine event. "That's me," he said, nodding at one of the photos. It wasn't a confession, it was a fact. From there, the dam broke. He spoke calmly, without emotion. He told investigators he had first seen Amy at the trailhead, that he followed her, that he watched her set up her camp near Holly Lake, waiting until she stepped away to collect water. He described the ambush like it was a rehearsed script. When asked why he took her life, his answer was as cold as it was disturbing. She fought back, harder than I expected. He buried her in a shallow grave, took her camera as a trophy, and walked out of the park under cover of darkness. When pressed for a deeper reason, Fraser's response sent chills through the room. She shouldn't have been out there alone. His confession did more than solve Amy's case. It revealed a larger pattern of violence. With his words, investigators connected Fraser to at least 2 other unsolved disappearances in the Rocky Mountains. The faceless predator now had a name. The trial was swift. The evidence, photographs, testimony, and his own words left no doubt. The courtroom in Jackson was packed each day. Community members, journalists, and the families of women Fraser had harmed. Amy's parents, Mark and Sarah Turner, sat in the front row, day after day, holding each other, holding on. Fraser showed no emotion, no remorse, a void in human form. The jury's deliberation was short. He was found guilty on all counts: kidnapping, assault, and murder in the first degree. The judge delivered the sentence with weight: life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The man who once stalked through the beauty of the backcountry would now spend the rest of his life behind walls of steel and silence. But the case didn't end there. Among the items found in his possession were driver's licenses and personal belongings linked to other women who had vanished in the mountains, one from Colorado, another from Idaho. Their families, like the Turners, had waited for years in painful silence. Fraser's confession gave them answers, and finally, the chance to bring their loved ones home. He had used the vast, quiet wilderness as his cover, moving from job to job, town to town, hiding behind the beauty of the land to mask the darkness inside him. For Amy's parents, the verdict brought a form of justice, but not peace. The loss was too deep, the pain too permanent. But they were able to bring her home. They held a memorial not in a church, but in the place she loved most, at a scenic overlook in the Tetons, with the cathedral peaks rising silently in the background. Friends and family gathered to remember Amy, her creativity, her kindness, her love for wild places. Her father, Mark, spoke last. His voice, usually quiet, carried strength as he thanked the searchers, the investigators, the strangers who had helped along the way. Many called him a hero, the father who never gave up, but he refused the title. "I just did what any father would do," he said, eyes locked on the peaks she once explored. "I just wanted to find my little girl." They gave her a resting place, a place of peace, and began the long, painful path of grieving, a journey without a map and no clear end. The case of Amelia Turner left a deep scar on the town of Jackson and on everyone who seeks solace in wild places. Her story is a permanent reminder that danger in the wilderness isn't always the storm or the fall or the wildlife. Sometimes it walks on 2 feet. Sometimes the most beautiful places can hide the darkest truths. The Tetons still rise with the same breathtaking grace. The rivers still run clear. The forest still whispers its ancient secrets. But for those who know what happened to Amy Turner, the beauty of these mountains will always carry a quiet shadow.